Down the aisles of an ordinary grocery store, a child reaches out to an elderly woman the world had long since stopped seeing. This simple yet profoundly human
Excuse
gesture
me, where can we find the
touches the heart
cereal?
of a lonely billionaire who
It's
witnesses
right around the
scene.
corner.
In that moment, a chain of transformation is set in motion, proving that a child's compassion can change entire destinies. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Let's get back to it. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear. The warm September afternoon settled over New York City. The sky had that typical grayish hue of an overcast day, when the sun stubbornly hides behind the dense clouds blanketing the metropolis. In the Queens neighborhood of Astoria, the Value Mart supermarket was humming with the usual rhythm of a typical Tuesday. Shopping carts glided down the aisles, soft background music played from the speakers, and dozens of people went about their grocery shopping routines without a second thought. Among them was Sarah Johnson, a 32-year-old woman with brown hair pulled back in a hurried ponytail, her eyes tired but still full of tenderness. She wore faded jeans and a simple blouse, carrying a worn-out purse on her shoulder as she pushed the cart with one hand. In her other hand, she held on tight to the small fingers of her daughter, Laura, a 7-year-old girl with dark braids and bright black eyes that seemed to capture everything around her. Laura had an observant nature that not all children possess. While her mother checked prices on the shelves, mentally calculating every cent to stay within the month's tight budget, the little girl let her gaze wander through the aisles. She saw other families, employees restocking shelves, elderly people walking slowly with their small baskets. Everything caught her attention. Everything seemed to have a story. Sarah worked 2 jobs. In the morning, she was on the cleaning staff in a downtown office building. In the afternoons, when she could, she picked up side gigs as a housekeeper. Life wasn't easy. It never had been. Ever. Since Laura's father left when the girl was still crawling, Sarah had to work twice as hard to provide for them both. But she never complained in front of her daughter. She smiled, played, made up bedtime stories, and made sure Laura grew up believing that the world, despite its hardships, still had goodness in it. And maybe that's why Laura had such a generous heart. Maybe it was the way her mother raised her, always teaching her that helping others was more important than having a lot. Or maybe it was simply the essence of that child, a beautiful mystery that not even Sarah herself could explain. They were in the canned goods aisle when Laura noticed her. An elderly woman, thin, stooped by the weight of the years, was holding a plastic cup of instant soup with both hands. Her hands trembled slightly. She looked at the product with an expression that mixed desire and resignation. She would pick up the cup, look at the price, and put it back on the shelf. She repeated the gesture, picked it up again, sighed deeply, and once more, left it there. Laura let go of her mother's hand and took a few steps toward the woman. Sarah, distracted by the crumpled shopping list she'd pulled from her pocket, didn't notice right away. The girl stopped beside the woman and looked up at her wrinkled face, marked by old tears and forgotten smiles. The woman wore a faded blue dress, mended in a few places, and carried a worn fabric bag. Her grey hair was tied in a loose bun. She didn't notice the child's presence. The woman's name was Martha. Ms. Martha, as she liked to be called back when there were still people to call her that. She was 74 and lived alone in a small rented room in the back of an old house in another part of Queens. Her husband had passed away years ago, leaving her with debt and a broken heart. Her son, her only child, had drifted away after bitter fights over money, pride, and life choices. It had been so long she couldn't even remember exactly how long. Martha received a meager Social Security check that barely covered her rent and basic bills. Buying food was an exercise in painful arithmetic. Every dollar had to be stretched as far as it could go. That cup of soup cost $4.20. It seemed like so little, but it was almost half of what she had left to get through the week. Laura cleared her throat softly. The woman looked down and met those deep, dark eyes watching her with curiosity and something more. Something she hadn't seen directed at her in a very long time. Empathy. Concern. "Hi," Laura said in a soft voice. "Do you need some help?" Martha blinked, surprised. "Honey, No, dear. I'm just looking. Do you want that soup?" I can ask my mum to buy it for you. She's nice. My mum always helps people. No, no, child. The woman waved her hand, trying to smile, but her eyes filled with tears. Thank you, my angel, but you don't have to. Go on with your mother. But Laura didn't move. She stood there, looking at Martha with that childlike seriousness that can sometimes disarm adults. She saw beyond appearances. She saw a person who was hungry, a person who was sad, and that, for Laura, was enough. "Mom!" the girl called out without taking her eyes off the woman. Sarah turned her head and finally saw where her daughter was. She walked over quickly, worried. "Laura, what are you doing?" "I'm sorry, Mum, she's very curious." But before Sarah could pull her daughter back, Laura pointed to the cup of soup. "Mum, she wants this soup, but she doesn't have money to buy it. Can we buy it for her, please?" Sarah felt her face flush. She looked at the woman, who was now crying silently, ashamed. She looked at her daughter, at those pleading eyes. She looked at her own cart, which was already fuller than it should be. She did the math in her head. She knew there was no extra money, but she also knew she couldn't say no. A man was watching everything from a distance. Edward Miller was 46 years old and owned one of New York's largest construction firms. His name appeared on billionaire lists, on the covers of business magazines, in society columns. He wore an impeccable suit, even in a supermarket, and held a small basket with a few things he didn't even need. He was there by chance, having just left a nearby meeting, just to buy a bottle of water. But now he was frozen, unable to move, watching the scene unfold a few yards ahead. That elderly woman, that faded blue dress, the way she held things with both hands. It couldn't be. Edward felt his chest tighten. His hands started to shake. He dropped the basket on the floor without realizing it. The sound of the plastic hitting the tile drew the attention of a few people, but he didn't care. His eyes were fixed on the woman. It was her, his mother. How long had it been? 8 years. 10. Edward had lost count. On purpose. He had erased that memory. That pain, that guilt. When he got rich, when he built his empire, he decided he no longer needed that poor past, that mother who always complained about his choices, that simple last name he had legally changed. Miller wasn't his birth name. It was Johnson, Edward Johnson, son of Martha Johnson and John Johnson, a humble couple from rural Ohio who had moved to New York in search of a better life. His father had died young, leaving mother and son struggling to survive. Edward grew up watching his mother work to the point of exhaustion, seeing the tight budgets, feeling the shame of not having enough. When he became wealthy, when he finally escaped poverty, he promised himself he would never go back. He offered his mother money. She refused proudly, saying she didn't want a handout from a son who was ashamed of his own roots. They fought. Harsh words were exchanged. He slammed the door and never came back. Now, there she was, old, frail, alone, unable to buy a cup of soup. And a child, a small, generous girl, was doing what he should have been doing years ago. Sarah took a deep breath and smiled at the woman. "Of course we can buy it. It would be our pleasure." "No, dear, please." Martha tried to refuse, but her voice broke. "I don't want to be a bother." "You're not bothering us at all." Laura had already grabbed the cup and put it in her mother's cart. "There, now it's yours." Martha broke down in tears. She covered her face with her hands and cried like she hadn't cried in years. Sarah moved closer and gently touched her arm. "Are you okay? Would you like to sit down for a minute?" Martha shook her head, unable to speak. Laura took the woman's wrinkled hand and squeezed it gently. "You don't have to cry. Everybody needs help sometimes. My mom taught me that." Those simple words pierced Martha like a blade of light in the darkness. She looked at that child, at that pure, sincere little face, and felt something she had forgotten. She felt that she still mattered, that she was still seen, that she was still human. Edward approached slowly, his heart pounding. He wanted to speak. He wanted to scream. He wanted to run over there and hug his mother and beg for forgiveness. But his legs wouldn't obey. His voice wouldn't come out. He stood a few feet away, hidden behind a shelf, watching. Sarah helped Martha compose herself. What's your name, Mom? Martha. You can call me Ms. Martha. Ms. Martha, it's a pleasure. I'm Sarah and this is my daughter, Laura. We're going to pay for your groceries at the checkout, okay? Is there anything else you need? Martha looked at the empty cart she was holding. She had come to the market hoping to buy at least the basics, but she knew she couldn't afford it. She was going to go home empty-handed like so many other times. Sarah noticed her gaze. Come with us, let's do a little shopping. No, dear, I can't accept, it's already too much. Miss Martha, please let us help. It'll be good for us too. Laura loves doing nice things, and so do I. Laura pulled on Martha's hand and started walking, dragging the older woman with her. Sarah smiled and followed them with the cart. They went through the aisles picking out basic items, a bag of rice, beans, a jar of coffee. Martha protested with every item, but Sarah and Laura insisted, sweetly. Edward followed them from a distance, unable to look away. He saw his mother smiling shyly. He saw that little girl holding her hand with confidence. He saw the other woman, clearly struggling herself, choosing to help anyway. Something inside him broke. All the justifications he had built over the years, all the excuses, all the pride, it all crumbled in the face of that scene. He had enough money to buy the entire supermarket, and he was standing there, hiding, while a 7-year-old girl showed more compassion than he had ever shown. At the checkout, Sarah paid for the groceries. It came to $230. She felt her stomach clench at the total, but she didn't hesitate. She swiped her card, praying it would go through. It did. She gave a silent thank you. Martha was crying again. Sarah borrowed a pen and a piece of paper from the cashier and wrote down her phone number. Ms. Martha, here's my number. If you need anything, just call me, okay? And I'd like your number too. Let's stay in touch. Martha, with trembling hands, wrote her number on another piece of paper. The two exchanged numbers as if sealing a silent pact of friendship and care. Laura hugged Martha tightly. You're really nice, I'm going to miss you. Martha knelt with difficulty and kissed the girl's forehead. You're an angel, my child, a real angel. Thank you for seeing me. Sarah helped Martha carry her groceries to the bus stop. They stood there chatting for a few more minutes until the bus arrived. Martha got on, still crying, waving from the window as the bus pulled away. Sarah and Laura walked home. They lived in a small 2-room apartment a few blocks away. On the way, Sarah held her daughter's hand and asked softly, Why did you do that, honey? How did you know she needed help? Laura thought for a moment. I just felt it, Mom. She was sad, and I don't like it when people are sad. Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand, proud and moved at the same time. Edward left the supermarket in a daze. He got into his car, a gleaming black BMW, and just sat there with his hands on the steering wheel. He couldn't drive. He couldn't think straight. His mother was struggling, and he didn't know, or worse, he didn't, or want to know. He picked up his phone and called his personal assistant. Rick, I need you to look into some people for me, urgently. I want full names, addresses, everything. I'll give you the descriptions. He described Sarah, Laura, and Martha in detail. Rick, used to his boss's strange requests, simply agreed and said he would have the information soon. Edward drove to his apartment in Midtown, a luxury penthouse with a panoramic view of the city. He walked in, threw his jacket on the sofa and went to the window. He looked down at New York City below, the concrete monster he had helped build, and for the first time in years he felt ashamed of himself, ashamed of what he had become. That night, Martha arrived at her small room and put away the groceries, tears streaming down her face. Every item she took out of the bag felt like a miracle. It had been so long since she'd had real food in the house. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed and prayed, thanking God for that little girl, for that generous mother, for still being alive to experience kindness. Sarah tucked Laura into bed and watched her daughter for a long time. What an incredible child she had raised. How was so much love possible in such a small heart? She kissed the girl's forehead and whispered, I love you, before leaving the room. She sat down at the kitchen table and opened the notebook where she kept track of her bills. She calculated, recalculated, It was going to be tight until the next paycheck, but she would manage. She always did. And then she smiled, because she knew she had done the right thing, because she knew she was teaching Laura to be a good person. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. Edward couldn't sleep that night. He tossed and turned in his king-size bed between expensive Egyptian cotton sheets, and all he could see was his mother's face, that lost look, those trembling hands holding a cup of soup. In the middle of the night, he got up and went to his home office. He opened a locked drawer and took out an old photo, yellowed with time. It was him as a child in his mother's arms, both of them smiling, simpler times, happier times, he happier. Held the photo against his chest and cried like he hadn't cried since he was a boy. The next day, Rick called early. "I have the information, Mr. Miller. Give it to me, all of it." The woman's name is Sarah Johnson, 32 years old, works as cleaning staff and a housekeeper, lives at 345 Azalea Street, apartment 12. Single mother of a 7-year-old girl named Laura, student at the local public school. No record, simple life, no luxuries. And the elderly woman? Martha Johnson, 74 years old, retired, lives alone, widow. She has one son named... Rick paused strangely. "Say it," Edward insisted, even though he already knew what was coming. "A son named Edward Johnson. He changed his name to Edward Miller 12 years ago. It's you, sir." Edward closed his eyes. "I know. Thank you, Rick. You can hang up." He stood in silence in the middle of his enormous office, surrounded by diplomas, awards, photos with important people. And it all felt empty, hollow, meaningless. A 7-year-old girl, who had almost nothing, had shown more humanity in 5 minutes than he had shown in a lifetime. And that was going to change. He was going to change. He didn't know how yet. He didn't know when. But he knew that encounter in the supermarket had not been a coincidence. It was a new beginning, a second chance, and Edward Miller was not going to waste it. The days following the encounter at the supermarket were a time of deep turmoil for Edward Miller. He continued going to his office, signing contracts and attending meetings, but it was as if he were on autopilot. His mind was always somewhere else. He saw his mother's face everywhere. He heard that little girl's voice echoing in his thoughts, sitting. In his immense office on the 23rd floor of a glass tower in Midtown, Edward stared at the papers on his desk, without really seeing them. His partner, Michael, was trying to discuss the numbers for a new development, but he could tell his friend wasn't paying attention. "Edward, are you listening to me?" Michael snapped his fingers in front of his face. "What?" Edward blinked, returning to reality. "Sorry, Michael, go on." "Dude, what's going on with you? You've been like this for 3 days. Did something happen?" Edward sighed deeply. He looked at his partner, wondering if he should tell him. Michael had been his friend for years, since college. He knew part of Edward's story, but not all of it. No one knew all of it. "I saw my mother," Edward said, his voice low. Michael's eyes widened. "Your mother? But you haven't spoken to her in 10 years, almost 10 years. And she was struggling, Michael. She couldn't afford food, and I..." Edward ran a hand over his face. "I'm a billionaire, and my mother was hungry." The silence that fell over the room was heavy. Michael didn't know what to say. Edward had never talked much about his family. He always changed the subject when it came up. "What are you going to do?" Michael finally asked. "I don't know yet, but I have to do something. I can't keep pretending everything is okay." That same week, Edward began to act, but not in the impulsive way that characterized his business decisions. This time he wanted to do things carefully, with respect, with love, even if that word felt foreign in his mind after so long. He hired a private investigator to discreetly follow Martha's routine, not to invade her privacy, but to understand how she lived, what she needed, if she was safe. The report he received days later broke his heart into pieces. Martha woke up every day at 5 in the morning. She prayed before a small makeshift altar with old photos. She drank weak coffee, often without sugar, to save money. She would go for a walk around the block because she couldn't afford to take the bus for no reason. She would come back, watch shows on her old television. She ate a small lunch, an even smaller dinner. She went to bed early, curled up in her narrow bed, in a room with a water stain on the wall. Edward read the report 3 times. Each line was a stab of guilt. While he lived in a luxury penthouse, his mother lived in precarious conditions. While he wasted money on expensive dinners and designer clothes, she saved pennies just to eat. He decided to act on 2 fronts. First, he would take care of his mother, but in a way that wouldn't make her feel humiliated or invaded. Second, he would do something for the girl and the woman who had shown him the compassion he had forgotten existed. Meanwhile, life for Sarah and Laura continued its normal rhythm, or almost, because Miss Martha had become a constant presence. A few days after their meeting at the supermarket, Martha called Sarah. The trembling voice on the other end of the line asked if she could visit them. Sarah, always welcoming, enthusiastically said yes. Martha showed up at the door of the small apartment, carrying a cornbread she had made with the ingredients Sarah had bought for her. It was her way of saying thank you. She was nervous, holding the baking dish carefully. Sarah opened the door and smiled widely. "Miss Martha, what a wonderful surprise. Please come in." Laura ran to the woman and hugged her around the waist. "Miss Martha, you came. I missed you." Martha was moved again. That child had the power to melt her heart with such simplicity. "I missed you too, my flower." They sat at the small kitchen table. Sarah made coffee. Martha cut the cornbread. Laura ate her slice with sounds of satisfaction, making both women laugh. They talked for hours. Martha told her story. She spoke of the husband who had passed away, leaving debts. She spoke of the son who had drifted away. She spoke of the loneliness she carried like a weight on her back. She cried a few times. Sarah held her hand. "Miss Martha, you're not alone anymore. You have us now. You can come here whenever you want. Our home is your home." Laura, sitting next to Martha, rested her head on the woman's arm. "It's true. You're family now." Those simple words did something inside Martha. For the first time in years, she felt like she belonged somewhere, that she mattered to someone. Sarah noticed that Martha's clothes were very worn. The next day, she set aside some of her own clothes that were in good condition and took them to the woman. Martha protested, but eventually accepted when Sarah said Laura would be sad if she refused. The visits became frequent. Martha would come to Sarah's apartment 2 or 3 times a week. She would bring baked goods she made, help Sarah with small chores, and play with Laura. For the first time in a long time, she had a routine that included other people. She had a reason to wake up excited. Edward followed everything from a distance. The investigator he hired provided discreet reports. He learned about the growing bond between Martha and Sarah. He learned about the visits. He learned that his mother was happier, and that, instead of relieving him, increased his guilt. A stranger had managed to do for his mother what he never had. A woman who could barely support herself had opened the doors of her home, while he, who could give her everything, had closed the door to his heart. But Edward also began to act. He created a shell company, a sort of social organization, and through it he started making discreet transfers to Sarah's account. Small amounts at first, $500, $1,000, always with false justifications. A random social assistance program, a lottery win, an anonymous donation. Sarah was confused when she saw the money appear, but she didn't refuse it. She used it to improve their situation at home, to buy things for Laura, to help Miss Martha. Edward also hired someone to make small repairs to the room where Martha lived, pretending it was a city initiative. They fixed the water damage, they painted the walls, they replaced the old bed with a new one. Martha cried when she saw the changes, never knowing her son was responsible. But Edward knew it wasn't enough. It wasn't about money. It never had been. It was about presence. It was about love. And he needed to find the courage to take that step. One night, alone in his apartment, Edward picked up his phone and dialed his mother's number. His finger hovered over the call button for long minutes. His heart pounded. What would he say? How could he explain 10 years of absence? How could he ask for forgiveness? He turned off the phone without making the call. He wasn't ready yet. Meanwhile, Laura continued to be the special child she had always been, At school, teachers commented among themselves about the girl. She was the first to notice when a classmate was sad, the first to offer help, the first to share her lunch. Ms. Davis, Laura's teacher, called Sarah in for a meeting. "Sarah, I need to talk to you about Laura," Ms. Davis said, smiling. Sarah tensed up. "Is there a problem?" "Quite the opposite. Your daughter is extraordinary. I've never seen a child with so much empathy. She looks after her classmates, helps those who are struggling. She's kind to everyone. I wanted to know how you do it." Sarah sighed, relieved. "I don't do anything special. She's always been like this. I think she was just born with that heart." "Well, you should know you're doing a beautiful job. The world needs more children like Laura." Sarah left the school with a full heart, proud of her daughter, grateful to have such a special girl. That night, as Laura slept, Sarah sat beside her bed and watched her. She thought about everything she had been through, the hardships, the sleepless nights worrying about money, the sacrifices. And she thought that it was all worth it, because she had raised this incredible child. Ms. Martha was also changing. Her time with Sarah and Laura had rekindled something inside her. She started dressing better. She started smiling again. She started to have hope. And she started thinking about her son. Had Edward changed too? Had he come to regret things over time? Did he still think of her? One afternoon, while having coffee at Sarah's, Martha asked something that had been on her mind for days. "Sarah, do you think it's possible to forgive someone who hurt you very badly?" Sarah looked at the woman, sensing the pain behind the question. "I think so, Ms. Martha. If the person is truly sorry, I think we should give them a chance. And what if that person abandoned you, left you all alone? Even then, because holding a grudge only hurts ourselves. And sometimes people make mistakes, but they can change." Martha was silent, thoughtful. Laura, who was playing on the floor with dolls, got up and went to her. "Is Miss Martha thinking about her son?" the girl asked with that disarming intuition. Martha blinked, surprised. "How do you know?" "I just know. I think you should call him. I bet he misses you too." Sarah looked at her daughter, impressed. Laura always knew things in a way that couldn't be explained. Martha took Laura's small hand. "You really think so?" "I do. Everyone deserves a second chance. You taught me that yourself, Mum," Laura said, looking at Sarah. Sarah smiled, moved. "It's true. We always have to give a second chance." That conversation stayed with Martha for the next few days, and finally, a week later, she found the courage. She searched through an old box where she kept old papers and found a yellowed business card. It was from the law firm where Edward had worked before starting his own company. The number probably didn't work anymore, but maybe she could find him from there. She called the firm. The receptionist answered. "Hello, good morning. I'm looking for Mr. Edward Johnson. He worked there some years ago." "Mr. Johnson no longer works here, ma'am, but I can give you the contact information for his office." Martha wrote down the number with trembling hands. She thanked the woman and hung up. She stared at the piece of paper for long minutes. Should she call? Would he answer? Would he still care? She took a deep breath and dialed. At Edward's office, the secretary saw the call come in, an unknown number. She answered with her usual politeness. "Mr. Edward Miller's office, good morning." On the other end of the line, Martha almost hung up, but she found her courage. "Good morning, I'd like to speak with Edward. He's in a meeting at the moment. May I take a message?" "Could you tell him it's—" Martha swallowed hard. "Could you tell him it's his mother?" The secretary was silent for a moment. Edward had never mentioned his mother. "Of course, ma'am, I'll transfer the call." Edward was indeed in a meeting, but the secretary interrupted him. "Mr. Miller, there's a woman on the line who says she's your mother." Edward turned pale. He looked at the three businessmen sitting at the conference table. "Please, excuse me. This is urgent." The men left. Edward was alone, staring at the phone on the table. His mother was on the other end. After 10 years, she had taken the first step. With trembling hands, he picked up. "Hello? Edward?" Martha's voice was weak, filled with emotion. "Mom." The word came out almost as a whisper. They were both silent, just listening to each other breathe. There was so much to say, but the words wouldn't come. Martha started to cry. Edward closed his eyes, holding back his own tears. "Son, I don't know if you want to talk to me. I know we fought. I know I was wrong about a lot of things, but I needed to hear your voice. I needed to know if you were okay." Edward couldn't hold it in. He cried like he hadn't cried since he was a child. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything, for abandoning you, for being so proud, for forgetting about you." "Son, you don't have to be sorry." "Yes, I do. I left you alone. I let you struggle. I'm a terrible son." "No, Edward, you're not. You were always a good boy. I was the one who didn't understand your choices. I was the one who was too proud." They both cried, each in a different part of the city, but connected by that thin thread of love that had never completely broken. "Mom, I want to see you. Can I see you?" "Yes, son, I want to see you too." They arranged to meet the next day. Edward suggested a coffee shop in a neutral place, but Martha said she'd prefer her home. She wanted him to see how she lived. No lies, no masks. Edward agreed. That night, neither of them slept well. Martha tidied her small room for the 10th time. Edward mentally rehearsed what he was going to say. The next day, Edward arrived at the address his mother had given him. It was a simple street in Queens. Old houses, cracked sidewalks, kids playing in the street. He parked his BMW and looked around. It reminded him of his childhood, of the streets where he had grown up, of a time he had tried to erase from his memory. He rang the doorbell. Martha opened the door, and they looked at each other. She was older, more frail, but she was still the mother he remembered. He was taller, more elegant, but he was still the son she loved. "Mom." "Son." They hugged right there, in the doorway, crying without shame. They hugged as if trying to make up, for 10 years in a single moment. Martha smelled her son's scent. Edward felt his mother's frail body in his arms. They went inside. Edward saw the small room. He saw the poor conditions. He saw the freshly painted walls, not knowing he was the one who had paid for it. They sat at the small table. Martha served coffee. Edward drank in silence, memories flooding his mind. They talked for hours. They talked about the past, the mistakes, the hurt. And slowly, they began to build a bridge over the chasm that separated them. Edward told her about his business. Martha told him about her loneliness. Edward asked for forgiveness. Martha did too. And at one point, Edward said something that changed everything. "Mom, I want you to come live with me." Martha blinked, surprised. "Edward, I can't accept that." "Yes, you can. I have a huge penthouse. There are extra rooms. You can pick whichever one you want. Or if you prefer, I'll buy you a house. Whatever you want." "Son, I don't want your things out of pity." "It's not pity, Mom. It's love, it's guilt, it's everything I didn't do and should have done." Martha was silent, looking at the son she had found again. "Let me think about it, son. It's a lot to take in at once." Edward respected her wishes. They talked for a while longer. When he left, they hugged again at the door. "I'll be back tomorrow, Mom. And the day after. And every day, if you'll let me." "You can come, son. You can always come." Edward left a changed man. He was not the same person who had walked in. Something deep inside him had shifted. And as he drove back home, he thought of Laura, of the little girl who had started it all. She deserved something special. She deserved to be recognized. That's how the idea for the foundation began to form. Edward spent the following weeks planning. He wanted to create something grand, but meaningful, something that would honor Laura but also help other children like her. Children who showed genuine empathy, who acted with kindness even when they had little. He talked to lawyers, accountants, and non-profit experts. He assembled a team. He defined the foundation's goals. It would focus on identifying and supporting children who demonstrated values of compassion, solidarity, and social responsibility. The Foundation would offer scholarships, mentorship programs, financial support for families, and extracurricular activities. All of it discreetly, without fanfare, without media attention, and it would be in Laura's name. The Laura Johnson Foundation for Good. Edward hadn't told Sarah or the girl anything yet. He wanted it to be a surprise. He wanted to do it right. Meanwhile, he continued to visit his mother every day. He brought food, small gifts, and his company. Martha blossomed with each visit. She laughed more, she talked more, she was living again. And on one of those visits, he found Sarah and Laura there. They had come to visit Martha, not knowing he would be there. When Edward opened the door and saw the little girl standing there, his heart nearly stopped. Laura looked at him with those deep, dark eyes. "Hi," she said simply. "Hi," Edward replied, his voice cracking. Sarah sensed the tension. She looked at the well-dressed man, then at Ms. Martha. "I'm sorry. We didn't know you had company. We'll come back later." "No," Martha stood up. "You don't have to leave. Please stay. Edward, these are the people I told you about, Sarah and Laura." Edward looked at them both. So this was them, the people who had cared for his mother when he wasn't there. "It's a pleasure," he said, extending his hand to Sarah. "Edward." Sarah shook his hand, not understanding the emotion she saw in the man's eyes. Laura came closer and looked at him curiously. "Are you Miss Martha's son?" "I am," Edward replied, kneeling to be at the girl's level. "That's cool. She talked about you a lot. She said you're very important." Edward felt his eyes burn. "Not as important as you, little one." Laura tilted her head, not understanding. "Me? Why?" Edward looked at the girl who had changed everything. "Because you have a big heart, bigger than most adults I know." And there, in that small room, 4 people came together, each carrying their own stories, each about to have their lives transformed forever. The meeting in that small room marked the beginning of a new chapter for everyone. Edward started visiting his mother on the same days that Sarah and Laura did. At first, Sarah felt awkward in the presence of such an elegant man who was clearly wealthy and important. But Edward made a point of being simple, approachable, and human. They talked about life. Edward asked about Laura, about school, about the girl's dreams. Sarah spoke with pride about her daughter, about how special she was, about the teacher's comments. Laura, in turn, talked to Edward with the same natural ease she had with everyone. "What do you do for work?" Laura asked one afternoon as they ate carrot cake that Martha had made. "I have a construction company. We build office buildings, houses, shopping malls." "Wow! So you're rich?" Edward smiled a bit sheepishly. "I have some money, yes. And do you help people?" "Because people who have a lot should help people who have a little. My mum taught me that." Edward looked at Sarah, who turned red. "I'm sorry, Laura. You can't just ask questions like that." "No, it's okay." Edward looked at the girl. "You're right, Laura. People who have a lot should help people who have a little, and I'm learning how to do that." "Good," Laura smiled. "Because the world needs good people." Those simple words echoed in Edward's mind for days. The world needs good people, and Laura was living proof of that. A few weeks later, Edward asked Sarah to speak with him privately. They met at a coffee shop near her apartment. Sarah went nervously, not knowing what to expect. Edward was already there when she arrived. He stood up politely and pulled out a chair for her. "Thanks for coming, Sarah." "Of course, what did you want to talk about?" "Please call me Edward," he smiled. "And I wanted to make you a proposal." Sarah's eyes widened, confused. Edward took a deep breath. "I've started a foundation. It's called the Laura Johnson Foundation for Good." Sarah blinked, bewildered. "Laura? My Laura?" "Your Laura," Edward nodded. "That day at the supermarket changed my life, Sarah. Seeing your daughter help my mother, seeing you pay for her groceries even when you didn't have much, it transformed me. It made me realize what an empty man I had become, and I want to honor that. I want to honor your daughter." I don't understand." The foundation will identify and support children like Laura, children who show genuine empathy, who help others, who do good without expecting anything in return. We'll offer scholarships, mentorship programs, and support for their families, and I want Laura to be the first beneficiary. Sarah felt her eyes well up with tears. "Edward, I don't know what to say." You don't have to say anything. You just have to accept. He pulled out a folder and placed it on the table. Everything is detailed in here. I'd like to pay for Laura's education at one of the best private schools in New York City. Full-day program, extracurricular activities, everything she needs. And I'd also like to offer you a job at the foundation if you're interested, as a family support coordinator. Sarah was in shock. A job? But I don't have the qualifications for that. You have something more important than qualifications. You have empathy, you know what it's like to be in need, you know how to genuinely help. And if you want to go to school, the foundation will pay for your education too. You've always wanted to study nursing, haven't you? Sarah's eyes widened. How do you know that? My mother told me. She said you mentioned it once. Sarah covered her face with her hands and cried. Edward waited in silence, letting her process everything. Why are you doing this? Sarah asked when she could speak. Because your daughter taught me what I had forgotten. She taught me that a simple gesture can change lives, and I want other children to have the opportunity to be like her. I want the world to have more Lauras. Sarah wiped her tears. I need to talk to Laura. I need to explain it to her. Of course, you don't have to decide now. Take your time. But Sarah already knew the answer. This was the opportunity she had always dreamed of for her daughter. The chance for Laura to get a quality education. The chance for her to achieve her own dream of becoming a nurse. She accepted. When she told Laura, the girl wasn't overly excited about the idea of a private school. To her, the public school she attended was just fine. She had her friends. She had teachers she loved. But when Sarah explained that it would be important for helping other children, Laura understood. If it's to help other kids, then okay. Edward began to put everything into motion. He enrolled Laura in one of the best private schools in New York City on the Upper East Side. A school that valued not only academic knowledge but also the emotional and social development of its students. The transition was difficult at first. Laura missed her friends from her old school. The kids at the new school were different, from wealthy families, and some were arrogant. But Laura, with her welcoming personality, soon earned the respect of her classmates. One incident stood out. A boy in her class, the son of business executives, was making fun of a classmate because she was on a scholarship. Laura overheard and approached them. "Hey, why are you talking to her like that?" The boy looked at Laura with disdain. "Because she doesn't. You belong here. This school is for people like us, not for poor people." Laura crossed her arms. "I'm on a scholarship too, so what?" The boy was speechless. Laura continued. "Having money doesn't make you better than anyone else. My mom taught me that. What matters is what's in your heart." The teacher who witnessed the scene intervened and reprimanded the boy. Later, she sought out Sarah to tell her what happened, praising Laura's character. Sarah, for her part, started working at the foundation and began the nursing program she'd always dreamed of. The days were long. She woke up early, dropped Laura off at school, went to her classes, then went to the foundation. She came home late but happy. For the first time in years, Sarah didn't have to worry about money. Edward had offered her a fair salary and also covered all of Laura's expenses. They moved into a larger two-bedroom apartment, still simple but comfortable. Edward also insisted that Martha move. After much discussion, she agreed to live in a small house he bought for her, just a few blocks from where Sarah lived. She didn't want to live in the penthouse with her son. She said she preferred her own space, but was grateful for the opportunity. The house had 2 bedrooms, a cozy living room, a full kitchen, and a small backyard where Martha started planting flowers. She decorated it simply, but with love. She put up old photos on the walls, photos of her and her husband, photos of Edward as a child. Edward visited his mother every week. He brought groceries, small gifts, and his company. Their relationship was slowly being rebuilt, brick by brick. There were still wounds, still unresolved hurts, but there was also love. And that was enough. The Laura Johnson Foundation for Good grew quickly. Edward invested millions of his own money. He assembled a competent team of educators, psychologists, and social workers. They created a process for identifying children who showed genuine empathy through referrals from schools, communities, and social organizations. The first group had 20 children, including Laura. They all received scholarships, their families received financial and psychological support, and the children participated in leadership and social responsibility development programs. Edward made a point of meeting each child personally. He talked with them, listened to their stories, and understood their realities. And each story changed him a little more. One day, during a foundation meeting, a psychologist said something that struck Edward. "You know, Mr. Miller, you're doing beautiful work here, but I feel like you're doing more for these children than you are for yourself." Edward frowned. "What do you mean?" "You dedicate so much to the foundation. You visit the children. You take care of everything. But I notice that you're alone. When was the last time you took care of your own happiness?" Edward was silent. The psychologist was right. He lived for his work and the foundation. He had no personal life. No significant relationships beyond his mother. The psychologist's name was Patricia. She was 38, divorced, with a 10-year-old daughter. She had started working at the foundation from the beginning and shared Edward's vision of doing good without seeking attention. In the following months, Edward and Patricia grew closer. They talked a lot during meetings. They sometimes had lunch together. He admired her passion for her work, the way she treated the children, her worldview. And during one of those lunches, Patricia brought up the subject again. "Edward, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "Why did you create this foundation? I know it has to do with Laura, but I feel there's more to it." Edward took a deep breath. "I created it because I spent 10 years of my life being selfish. I was successful in business. I got rich, but I lost what really mattered. I abandoned my mother. I forgot where I came from. I became someone I wouldn't want to know. And a 7-year-old girl taught me that wealth isn't about having money. It's about having humanity." Patricia placed her hand on his over the table. "And you learned your lesson. You're transforming. But you can't forget to live, too." Edward looked at her, at those brown eyes full of understanding. "Maybe you're right." They started seeing each other outside of work. Dinners, movies, walks in the park. Patricia's daughter, Melissa, quickly grew fond of Edward. And Edward, who had never thought about having children, discovered he liked the role of a father figure. Martha was thrilled when she learned her son was dating. She met Patricia and approved of her instantly. "She's good for you, son. I'm happy." Laura was excited too. At the foundation school, she became friends with Melissa. The two became inseparable. 6 months after the foundation started, Edward gathered the entire team and the families of the beneficiary children for a special event. He rented a beautiful hall, decorated simply but tastefully. Sarah was nervous. She wasn't used to events like this. She wore a simple dress she had bought for the occasion. Laura wore a white dress that Edward had given her as a gift. Martha was also there, looking beautiful in a new outfit her son had bought for her. Edward went up on stage and took the microphone. He looked at all those people, children, parents, mothers, grandparents, simple people, people who struggled, people who deserved a chance. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. Today marks 6 months of the foundation, and I'd like to share a few things." The audience fell silent. "A few months ago, I was a lost man. Rich, yes. Successful, perhaps. But empty. I had forgotten my roots. I had abandoned my mother. I had become someone who only thought about profit and power." Edward paused, his voice thick with emotion. "Until a 7-year-old girl taught me what really matters." He looked at Laura, who was sitting in the front row next to Sarah. "Laura, could you come up here, please?" The girl stood up a bit shyly and walked onto the stage. Edward knelt beside her. "This girl," he continued, "saw an elderly woman who couldn't afford food, and instead of walking by, instead of pretending she didn't see, she stopped. She cared. She helped. And that woman was my mother." A murmur went through the hall. Sarah's eyes widened, finally understanding everything. "I was there. I saw it all. I saw this girl show more compassion in 5 minutes than I had shown in 10 years. And it destroyed me. It made me look in the mirror and hate what I saw, but it also gave me hope. Because if a child who had almost nothing could be so generous, then I, who had so much, could also change. Edward stood up, holding Laura's hand. That's why I created this foundation, to honor this girl, to find other children like her, to show the world that there is still goodness, there is still empathy, there is still hope. And this foundation isn't mine, it's yours. It belongs to the children, it belongs to everyone who believes we can make the world a better place, one gesture at a time. The audience erupted in applause. Martha was crying in the front row. So was Sarah. Patricia, sitting next to Martha, smiled emotionally. Edward looked at Laura. Thank you for saving me. Laura, with her characteristic simplicity, just smiled and hugged him. That night marked the true beginning of everything. The foundation gained more visibility, not because Edward sought out the press, but because the stories naturally leaked out. Journalists began to investigate. TV shows requested interviews. Edward refused them all. He didn't want the spotlight. He didn't want to be the center of attention. He just wanted to do good. But the story of Laura and the foundation reached many people. Donations started pouring in. Other companies offered to help. Schools wanted to participate in the child identification program. The foundation grew. From 20 children it went to 50, then 100, then 200. They opened offices in other cities. The impact was real and measurable. Sarah finished her nursing program with honors. Edward hired her to work at the pediatric hospital the foundation was building. She was finally living her dream of caring for children as a nurse. Martha, inspired by everything that was happening, started to write. She wrote about her life, about loneliness, about reuniting with her son. She wrote about the invisibility of the elderly in society. Patricia, who had many contacts in the publishing world, helped Martha get a book published. The book was called It's Never Too Late to Start Over and told Martha's story honestly and touchingly. It talked about widowhood, about the estrangement from her son, about the years of loneliness. And it talked about the day a little girl made her feel seen again. The book became a national bestseller. Martha began to be invited to give talks, to appear on television shows. She, who had been invisible for so long, now had a voice. And she used that voice to advocate for the elderly, to talk about dignity, to inspire other people. All the money she earned from the book was donated to projects supporting vulnerable seniors. She didn't need the money. Her son took care of her. But she wanted to make a difference. Edward and Patricia got married in a simple ceremony with only family and close friends. Martha cried with happiness. Sarah and Laura were there. Melissa was the flower girl. Edward was radiant. He looked at Patricia and saw not just a wife, but a partner in life and purpose. Together, they led the foundation with love and dedication. They decided that Edward would gradually step back from the direct management of his construction companies. He would remain the majority shareholder, but would delegate management to others. He wanted to dedicate his time to the foundation, to the children, to transforming lives. The change wasn't easy. There was resistance from partners and shareholders. But Edward was firm in his decision. Money no longer motivated him. Purpose did. Laura grew up beautiful and wise. At 9 years old, she was already an active participant in the foundation, not symbolically, but for real. She had ideas, made suggestions, helped identify other children. Edward created a youth council within the foundation. It was made up of Laura and 10 other children from the program. They met once a month to discuss improvements, propose new projects, and give voice to their own needs. One of the ideas that came from this council was to create a mentorship program between children. Children who'd been in the foundation longer would mentor newcomers, offering emotional support and guidance. Laura was the first mentor. She mentored a 7-year-old girl named Beatrice, who came from a very poor family on the outskirts of the city. Beatrice was shy, scared by everything that was happening. But Laura welcomed her with patience and kindness. They talked every week. Laura helped Beatrice with her homework, told her stories about what it was like for her at the beginning, and encouraged the girl to participate in activities. In 6 months, Beatrice was transformed, more confident, happier, more integrated. And Laura felt immense pride in having helped. Sarah watched her daughter grow with admiration. Laura was becoming an extraordinary young woman. She still had the same generous heart, but now she also had an awareness of the impact she could create. The two still lived in the two-bedroom apartment. Sarah didn't want to accept a larger house when Edward offered. She said she was happy where she was, that she didn't need luxuries. But Edward made sure to help in other ways. He paid all their bills, ensured they lacked nothing, and offered them trips during vacations. Sarah accepted with gratitude, knowing it was Edward's way of thanking her for everything. Martha, at 76, was unrecognizable. The frail, invisible woman from the supermarket had transformed into a respected activist. She gave talks across the country, wrote articles, and participated in debates on public policy for the elderly. Her relationship with Edward was solid. They had dinner together every week. He took her on outings to see new places. He made up for lost time with constant presence. And so, 3 years after that meeting in the supermarket, everyone had been transformed. Edward was no longer the cold, distant businessman, but a dedicated philanthropist. Martha was no longer the invisible elderly woman, but an active and respected voice. Sarah had achieved her dream of becoming a nurse and worked with love. And Laura, the girl who had started it all, continued to be the light that guided them all. The foundation had already impacted over 1,000 children across the country. The results were impressive. Children who once had no prospects now dreamed of college. Families who lived in poverty now had dignity. And it all started with a simple gesture. A little girl seeing a woman in need and deciding to help. Sometimes Laura thought about that day. She remembered Miss Martha's face, the tears, the tight hug. She didn't know at the time that that moment would change so many lives. She just knew that someone needed help, and she could help. And perhaps that was the most important lesson of all. You didn't need to have a lot to make a difference. You didn't need to be rich or powerful. You just needed a heart. You just needed to see the other person. You just needed to care. Edward learned that the hard way. He had to see a child do what he should have done. He had to confront his own failure, but he learned, and he changed. And now together, they were all writing a new story, a story of love, forgiveness, new beginnings, and hope. A story that proved it's never too late to change, that there's always time to be better, and that a single act of kindness can create waves that reach unimaginable places. 5 years had passed since that September afternoon in the supermarket. 5 years that felt like a lifetime. Laura was now 12 and was unrecognizable. Not in her essence, that remained the same, but in her posture, her confidence, her awareness of the impact her existence had on the world. It was a Saturday morning, and Laura was in her room, mentally rehearsing the speech she would give that night. The Laura Johnson Foundation for Good was celebrating its 5th anniversary, and there would be a grand ceremony. It wasn't the kind of event Edward usually liked, but this time he had agreed. It was important to celebrate, to acknowledge the work, to inspire more people. Laura looked in the mirror. She saw a tall girl for her age with long dark hair now tied in an elegant bun, and eyes that still shone with the same depth as when she was 7. She wore a simple but beautiful navy blue dress. She didn't like flashy clothes. She preferred simplicity. Sarah entered the room. At 37, she was radiant. Her face had fewer lines of exhaustion, and her eyes shone with fulfillment. She worked at the Foundation's pediatric hospital and loved every day of it. She wore her nurse's uniform with pride, cared for the children with dedication, and lived the dream she had held for so many years. "Honey, are you nervous?" Sarah sat on the bed next to Laura. "A little. It's a lot of people, and it's going to be on TV." "You'll do great, you always do." Sarah stroked her daughter's hair. "I'm so proud of you." Laura smiled. "Mum, you always say that." "Because it's always true." Sarah hugged her daughter. "Remember when we lived in that tiny apartment, when I worked 2 jobs and there was barely any money left over?" "I remember." Laura rested her head on her mother's shoulder. "Sometimes it feels like a dream. Everything that's happened, everything that's changed. But it was real, Mum. And it was because of that afternoon at the market." "No, honey, It was because of your heart. You could have walked right by. You could have ignored Miss Martha, but you stopped. You cared." Laura was silent. She still remembered that day clearly. The woman's lost gaze, her trembling hands holding the cup of soup, the tears streaming down her face when she offered to help. "Mom, I just did what I thought was right. I didn't know it would change so much." And that's exactly why it did. Because you didn't do it expecting a reward. You did it because you felt you should. The two hugged in silence. Outside, New York was waking up to another day. The city was the same, bustling, noisy, immense. But inside that apartment, inside that embrace, there was peace. On the other side of the city, in Martha's house, the 79-year-old woman was getting ready for the ceremony. She was a far cry from the frail woman who had hesitated over a cup of soup years ago. Now, she wore an elegant dress her son had bought her. Her grey hair was styled beautifully, and her face, though marked by the years, shone with vitality. Her book, It's Never Too Late to Start Over, was in its second printing and continued to sell well. The talks she gave on the invisibility of the elderly had influenced public policy. She had become an authority on the subject, consulted by government agencies and organizations. But what made her happiest wasn't the recognition. It was having her son back. It was having a family. It was having a purpose. Edward arrived to pick her up. He walked into the house he had bought for his mother and smiled when he saw her all dressed up. "You look beautiful, Mum." "Oh, son." Martha waved her hand dismissively, but she was visibly pleased. "You look handsome, too." Edward wore a discreet suit, no tie. At 51, he looked younger and more alive than ever. The weight he had carried on his shoulders years ago was gone. Now he smiled easily, hugged frequently, and showed emotion without shame. "Nervous for tonight?" he asked as he helped his mother into the car. "A little. I'm speaking too, right? About the book, about the foundation." "You'll do great." Edward held his mother's hand. "You always do." Martha squeezed her son's hand. "Who would have thought, that we'd get here?" Edward felt a lump in his throat. Who would have thought? They drove in comfortable silence to the event venue. It was a convention center in a nice part of the city, decorated simply but tastefully. Photos of the children helped by the foundation covered the walls. Video testimonials played on large screens. The atmosphere was one of celebration and gratitude. Patricia was there early, organizing the final details. As the head psychologist for the foundation, she coordinated all the emotional support programs for the children and families. But more than that, she was Edward's partner in everything. Together they had built something extraordinary. Melissa, Patricia's daughter, now 15, was helping to greet the guests. She and Laura had become like sisters. They went to the same school, participated in foundation activities together, and shared dreams and secrets. The hall began to fill up. Hundreds of people arrived, children from the foundation and their families, teachers, psychologists, social workers, donors, journalists, public officials. Edward greeted everyone, but his eyes searched for Laura. When he saw her walk in with Sarah, he felt his chest tighten. That girl had changed his life. She had saved him from himself. "Laura, come here." Edward waved her over. The girl approached. "Hi, Edward." He knelt to be at her level, even though she was almost as tall as he was. "Ready for your speech?" "I think so. I'm nervous." "You don't need to be. You just have to speak from the heart, like you always do." Laura smiled. "Are you speaking too?" "I am, but after you. You're the star of the show tonight." "I didn't want to be a star. I just wanted to help." Edward felt his eyes burn. "I know, and that's exactly why you're special." The ceremony began promptly at 7 p.m. The hall was packed. Television cameras were strategically positioned. Everything would be broadcast live on a national network. Patricia spoke first. She went on stage and thanked everyone for coming. She talked about the foundation's work, about the impressive numbers. More than 3,000 children had already been helped, 50 partner schools, 20 cities served, hundreds of families transformed. Next, it was Martha's turn. She walked to the stage with Edward's help and took the microphone with hands that still trembled slightly, but now with emotion, not weakness. "Good evening, everyone." Martha looked out at the audience. 5 years ago, I was an invisible woman. I lived alone, without prospects, without hope. I thought my life was over, that I no longer mattered to anyone. She paused, emotional. Until a 7-year-old girl saw me. She truly saw me. She cared for me. The silence in the hall was absolute. That little girl didn't know me. She didn't know my name, my story, anything. But she saw that I needed help, and she offered it, without a second thought, without expecting anything in return, simply because she had a good heart. Martha wiped away a tear. And that gesture changed my life. It gave me hope again. It showed me that there was still goodness in the world. She looked at Laura, who was sitting in the front row. "Laura, you have no idea what a gift you gave me that day. You gave me dignity. You gave me purpose. You gave me the will to live. And I will be eternally grateful." The audience applauded. Laura was crying softly. Sarah held her hand. Martha continued. "Today, I have my son back. I have a family. I have a purpose. I write, I speak, I help other seniors. All because a child taught me that it's never too late to start over. Thank you, Laura. Thank you for saving me." The audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation. Martha came down from the stage and went straight to hug Laura. The two cried together. Edward was the next to speak. He went on stage, still moved by his mother's speech. "Good evening." Edward took a deep breath. 5 years ago, I was a rich but empty man. I had built a financial empire, but I had lost my humanity. I abandoned my mother, the woman who gave me life, because I was ashamed of where I came from, because I thought being rich made me better than others. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. Until one afternoon, in an ordinary supermarket, I witnessed a scene that changed everything. I saw a 7-year-old girl helping my mother. I saw that child show more compassion in 5 minutes than I had shown in 10 years, and it destroyed me. Edward looked at Laura. "Laura, you showed me the empty man I had become, and at the same time you gave me hope that I could change. You saved me from myself. You reconnected me with my humanity. You taught me that wealth isn't about having money. It's about having a heart." He extended his hand to Laura. "Come up here, please." Laura walked onto the stage, her legs trembling. Edward pulled her close. "Because of this girl, I created this foundation. Because of her, I found my mother again. Because of her, I became a better man. And now, Laura is going to tell us what she has learned in these 5 years." Edward stepped down, leaving Laura alone with the microphone. She looked at the audience. Hundreds of people looked back at her. Cameras filmed her. The entire country was watching. She took a deep breath and began. "Hi, my name is Laura, and I'm 12 years old. 5 years ago, I did something I thought was simple. I saw a lady who needed help, and I offered it. I didn't know that lady was Edward's mother. I didn't know he was watching. I didn't know it would change so many lives." Her voice was clear, steady. "My mom always taught me that helping others is important, that it doesn't matter how much we have, we can always do something. And that day I just followed my heart." She looked at Sarah, who was crying in the audience. "Sometimes people think that to make a difference, you need a lot of money, a lot of power. But that's not true. To make a difference, you just need to see the other person, to really see them, to care." Laura paused, gathering her thoughts. "In these 5 years, I've learned a lot. I've learned that responsibility isn't about doing things when everyone is watching. It's about doing them when no one is. It's about helping even when you get nothing in return. It's about caring because it matters." The audience listened in absolute silence. "I've met hundreds of kids through the foundation, kids who also have good hearts, kids who help their families, who take care of their younger siblings, who share the little they have, and I realize that I'm not special. All of these kids are special too. They just needed a chance." Laura looked at Edward. "Edward gave me that chance. But more than that, he believed that my gesture meant something. He turned a small moment into a big movement. And now the foundation helps thousands of children. She took a deep breath before continuing. But I want to say something important. The foundation is beautiful. The work is incredible. But none of it would matter if we didn't truly change. If I had gotten a scholarship but stayed selfish, it wouldn't have meant anything. If Edward had created the foundation just for show, it wouldn't have meant anything. Laura looked at the audience. What matters is what we carry in our hearts. It's how we treat people. It's whether we choose to see the other person or just walk by. Because every day we have small choices. To help or to ignore, to care or to forget. And it's these small choices that build who we are. She paused, emotional. That day in the supermarket, I chose to stop. I chose to see Miss Martha. I chose to offer help. And that small choice changed my life. It changed her life. It changed Edward's life. It changed my mom's life. And now it's changing the lives of thousands of children. Laura wiped away a tear. So my request to all of you is simple. Make good choices. See people. Care. Not because you'll get something. Not because someone is filming. But because it's the right thing to do. Because we're human. Because we can make a difference. The audience erupted in applause. Everyone stood up. Edward was crying openly. Martha covered her face with her hands. Sarah hugged Patricia, both in tears. Laura came down from the stage and went straight into her mother's arms. Sarah hugged her tightly, whispering words of pride in her daughter's ear. The rest of the ceremony was a celebration, musical performances, testimonials from children, videos showcasing the foundation's work. Thanks to donors and partners. When it ended, it was past 10 p.m. People slowly left. Edward stayed behind to help clean up, talking to the last few guests, thanking them for coming. Laura was tired but happy. She sat on a bench in the outdoor garden of the convention center, looking at the stars. New York rarely had a clear sky, but that night a few stars managed to pierce through the light pollution. Edward found her there. "Can I sit?" "Of course." Laura made room on the bench. They sat in silence for a few minutes, just contemplating the sky. "Your speech was incredible," Edward finally said. "Thanks. I was afraid I'd forget something." "You spoke from the heart. It was perfect." More comfortable silence. "Laura, there's something I never told you." Edward turned to her. "What?" "That day in the supermarket when you helped my mother, I was there. I saw everything. And when I realized that woman was my mother, whom I had abandoned, who was struggling while I had so much, I hated myself. I hated myself like I had never hated myself before." Laura looked at him, surprised. "I wanted to die of shame. I wanted to disappear, because a 7-year-old child was doing what I should have been doing, and it destroyed me." Edward wiped away a tear. "But it also saved me, because it showed me that I could change, that it wasn't too late." "It's never too late," Laura said simply. "No, it's not. And you taught me that." Edward took the girl's hand. "Laura, I know the foundation is named after you. I know people see you as the inspiration, but I want you to know that you're more than that to me." "What am I?" "You're my moral compass. You're my inspiration. You're living proof that goodness exists. Every time I think about giving up, about going back to who I was, I think of you. I think of that simple gesture in the supermarket, and I remember what really matters." Laura squeezed his hand. "You're a good person, Edward. You've changed. You help so many people now." "Only because you taught me how." Edward smiled through his tears. "Do you know what you want to be when you grow up?" Laura thought for a moment. "I want to study psychology or social work. I want to keep helping kids. I think that's what I came into this world to do." "You're going to be amazing." Edward hugged the girl. "You already are." They stayed there, hugging, under the few visible stars of New York. Two people whose chance encounter had connected them forever. A businessman who had rediscovered his humanity. A girl who had changed the world with a simple gesture. Sarah appeared at the door. "Laura, we need to go. It's late." Laura stood up. "Bye, Edward. Thanks for everything." "Thank you for everything." The girl ran to her mother. Edward remained there alone on the bench, watching them walk away. Mother and daughter, two warriors, two incredible women. Patricia approached and sat next to him. "Are you okay?" "I am." Edward smiled. "I was just thinking how funny life is." "Why?" "Because 5 years ago, I had everything and I had nothing. Today I have fewer material things, but I have everything that matters. I have my mother. I have you. I have purpose. I have peace." Patricia rested her head on his shoulder. "You earned this peace." "No, I didn't earn it. But I was blessed with it anyway." The two sat there, looking out at the night. In the months following the ceremony, the foundation gained even more visibility. Laura's speech went viral on social media. Millions of people watched it. Hundreds of schools asked to use the video in their classrooms. The movement grew. But Laura remained Laura. She didn't let the fame go to her head. She continued to study, help at home, participate in the foundation, and care for her classmates. At 13, she created a side project within the foundation called Small Gestures, Big Changes. It was a program to encourage random acts of kindness. Children were encouraged to do something kind every week and share their experiences. The project spread. Schools adopted it. Families participated. Soon, thousands of children across the country were performing small acts of kindness and changing their communities. Sarah, seeing her daughter's impact, wrote an article for a health magazine on the importance of empathy in child development. The article was well received, and she began to be invited to give talks. Mother and daughter, each in their own way, were making a difference. Martha, at 80, published her second book, The Strength of New Beginnings. In it, she compiled stories of people who had turned their lives around after difficult situations. The book included her own story, but also those of Edward, Sarah, Laura, and dozens of others connected by the foundation. The book became a bestseller. Martha donated all the profits to the foundation. Edward and Patricia expanded their work to other countries. They started in Latin America, then Africa, then Asia. The foundation's model was replicable, and it worked. Identify children with genuine empathy. Support them. Transform their lives. Create a network of kindness. And it all started with Laura. Years passed. Laura finished middle school and started high school. She continued to be a role model at school among her friends and at the foundation. But she never forgot where she came from. She never forgot the small apartment, the difficult days, her mother's struggle. She regularly visited low-income communities, talked to vulnerable children, and offered hope through her story. Edward, now completely removed from his businesses, dedicated 100% of his time to philanthropy. He had no regrets. The money he had was more than enough. What mattered now was his legacy, and what a legacy he was building. The Laura Johnson Foundation for Good had become one of the largest social organizations in the Americas. Tens of thousands of children benefited, hundreds of projects, millions of lives impacted. But the numbers weren't the most important thing. The most important thing were the stories. The girl who escaped poverty and became a doctor, the boy who overcame abandonment and became a teacher, the teenager who lost her family but found purpose helping other orphans. Each story was a miracle. Each transformed life was a victory. And it all started in that supermarket, on that ordinary September afternoon, with a 7-year-old girl who decided to stop and care. Laura, now 16, was writing in her diary. It was a habit she'd had since she was a child. She jotted down thoughts, reflections, lessons learned. That night, she wrote something that summed it all up. Today, I understand that that day in the supermarket wasn't a coincidence. It was purpose. I was there at that moment because I needed to be. Miss Martha needed to be seen. Edward needed to be awakened. And I needed to learn that my actions matter, that we can all make a difference, no matter our age. No matter how much we have, what matters is the heart. What matters is choosing to see the other person, choosing to care, choosing to love, because in the end, that's what we leave behind. Not the awards, not the money, not the fame. We leave the love we gave, the lives we touched, the people we helped get back on their feet. And I want that when I'm gone, people will remember me like that, as someone who saw, someone who cared, someone who loved. She closed the diary and looked out the window. New York glittered below, alive and bustling as always. Millions of people, millions of stories, millions of opportunities to make a difference. And Laura knew that every day was a new chance, a new opportunity to choose kindness, to choose love, to choose to make the world a better place, because that's what she had learned, that transforming the world didn't require superpowers. It just required the courage to see, the compassion to care, and the love to act. And she, the girl who once reached out her hand in a supermarket aisle, would keep reaching out, today, tomorrow, always, because some people are born to be a light, and Laura was one of them.